society. And for us, what that means is usually that it has something to do with personal development and adult development, and to get on a bit further in our thinking and our living. We are also connected to something called the Inner Development Goals, quite a big initiative you may have heard. Otherwise, you will hear of it now, perhaps, when you know about it. It fits very well to have this kind of discussion here tonight, where the 4Ds are 4 different perspectives, just to turn in a bit to think not just what we feel, but also a bit what some other may feel, and how you can see things in different ways. You can become a member here. You're welcome to ask me afterwards, or there are 2 persons back there, also members here, and Geraldo, of course, he is a member here as well. Right, so very welcome to this place.
Thank you. It's a very nice place as well. So
Thank you.
I can understand why people gravitate here. So I'm Peter Sandberg, and I'll do the moderation and do the quotation marks, because this is a very informal meeting. But Professor Venkat, he will take the stage. He's the evening star, and he'll speak for about 45 minutes. And then if you're online, you can write your questions as they come up, sort of like, but we'll take them afterwards. And also here in the room, I hope to see a lot of hands coming up, and we can have not just Q&A, but actually dialogue between us and
Where is your blue sweater that you're washing? Because
on the curtains.
okay, I need to wash my towels, etc. And I'm not gonna do that either this afternoon or this evening.
with that, Professor Venkat,
Thank you.
welcome.
All right. Thank you so much for your support.
No, you got to do it to everyone. Muted. Great. Okay. Good evening. Great to be back in Stockholm after maybe 4 or 5 years. Somebody was asking me, is this my first time? And maybe it was Peter. I think my first time to Ericsson was in 1998. So it's 26 years back. I was here when Ericsson actually launched the E2 set-top box on top of a Electrolux refrigerator. So I don't know how many of you can remember that far back. Anyway, this book is really a book that culminated my academic career at Boston University. And it really started when I joined MIT in 1985 as an assistant professor. And what was interesting at that time was we started a research project in 1986, which was unusual in the business school because it's the first project that was forward-looking rather than backward-looking. We called it management in the 1990s because we thought the world is going to be very different in 4 years. And the fundamental question was, how will computer technology, information technology per se, impact business as we know it, management as we teach it, and management as we research it. And you got to remember 1986, the best piece of technology was an IBM PC with a green screen. And the best piece of software was Lotus 123, right across from my office. Computers were not connected. There were few people at MIT going around with ideas and what technology might be when it gets connected. But we had absolutely no idea what the world was going to be, right? When we finished the project, we started to understand that this is going to have an impact at multiple levels, at the level of individuals, at the level of organization, at the level of industry, and more importantly, at the level of the society. Fast forward to 2024, we are in a similar position. We can ask the same question: how will digital technology impact the field of management in 2030? How will it impact the way we manage ourselves, the way we manage our function? What will the organization look like in 2030? How will we create and capture value? All those questions that we asked in 1986 are still valid, except there's far greater technology than we know what to do today, right? And so there's the scale, scope, and speed of the technology, and the impact that it's going to have on us is going to be much more profound than what we have seen so far. And so we got to really ask the question, how do we think about it? What does it mean for us? How do we learn with others as we try to make sense out of these weak signals, as I'm calling them? Because we don't have very many strong signals. We've got lots of weak signals on what the world is going to be like in the future. So that's really why I wrote the book with my co-author, Vijay Govindarajan at Tuck. And we spent a lot of time trying to come up with a title for the book. And we finally chose the term fusion because it's the fusion of physical and digital. It's fusion of us and machines, us and agents, if you want to call it today. It's the fusion of our traditional disciplines that we studied with technology. So I'm a mechanical engineer. Where does mechanical engineering end and computer science begin? It's the fusion of physical worlds and virtual worlds. And it's a fusion of company and partners and society in the ecosystem, right? All those are start to melt together to create something very different. And so that's why we titled it Fusion. I think it's recorded. Gerardo has the slides. Feel free to share it, use it, discuss with others, because my purpose is just to spawn the discussion. So we know that the digital age is here. COVID made it very clear that suddenly we could actually switch and do a lot of things with technology. And we also know that as we got to this post-COVID world, three very powerful technologies have finally converged to put data and AI at the center. Faster, cheaper computers, greater connectivity, and the pervasive availability of the cloud, not as a computing platform, but not as a storage platform, but as a computing platform that can now process lots of transactions that allow us to get the AI capabilities on a continuous basis, right? So in the 1980s would have been computing, 90s and the early 2000s was connectivity, and the 2010s to 2020 the cloud. And when you put it all together, the next 5 years could be quite exciting and challenging at the same time. We also know that the economic landscape has changed significantly. If you look at the top companies in the world in terms of market capitalization, these are all the companies in the world in terms of top market capitalization, barring TSMC, everyone is an American company. And if you now look at the list of the top 30 US companies that are tech companies, the top 30 tech companies are each over $100 billion capitalized. And that's important to look at the economic impact of these technologies around the world. I have no idea what's going to happen post this election, and I will not talk about the election during this discussion, right? I'll stay away from that, Peter, from the question. The other thing that's also interesting is if you just go back to 2007, when Apple introduced iPhone, there's only one company on that list that was in the top 10 in terms of capitalization, and that was Microsoft. And Microsoft at that time was a desktop-centric, enterprise-centric company, and now it's cloud, AI, and a whole set of things around it. So all that has happened in the last 15, 16 years. So the next thing I did is not exactly drawn to scale because it's difficult to put it into a slide. I put the age of the company on the horizontal axis and the market capitalization on the vertical axis. And what is interesting is that there's a very logical evolution of innovation and value creation for the last 100+ years of the industrial age. Companies went from one product to multiple products, one division to multiple division, one country to multiple countries, and there's a linear evolution. Now the digital companies have a non-linear evolution. And these are not the old IT companies. These are not the IBMs and the Dells and the Hewlett Packards and the Oracles of the world. These are companies that are actively influencing the digital transformation of other sectors. And I think that's important because as they start to influence other sectors, the blurring, the fusion of the traditional industries and the digital industries become more pronounced. The blurring of the boundaries that become more pronounced, and that's also important to recognize. So the digital age is here, but the biggest problem is that the legacy business practices still rule. We still think of ourselves as in the automotive industry or pharmaceutical industry or telecommunication industry. We still think of ourselves as a marketing manager or a manufacturing manager or an operations manager. Those functions have all come from the legacy ideas of the industrial age that previously came from guilds that we carried into the industrial age organization and we continue to permeate. But we got to ask the question, there's a fusion of all these roles. Where does marketing end and analytics begin? Where does operations end and technology begin? So the legacy business practices still rule. So you start looking at these ideas from these digital companies. And I used to teach strategy for many years. I used to teach strategy in terms of scale, scope, and speed. Scale used to be market share. Scope used to be, can you take your core competencies and get into adjoining industries? And speed is, can you go slightly faster than your competitor? First mover, fast follower, right? Today, the digital companies are showing that the scale is not physical products, but is data scale with 100 million, if not a billion data points analyzed in real time with the power of computer connectivity and the cloud. Scope is interesting. You go from adjacencies to diagonals, which has no resemblance to where you come from, but suddenly digital allows you to go into an entirely new industry, right? Like when I was doing this work with a set of pharmaceutical companies, one of the executives said, what right does Apple have to get into healthcare? And I'm saying, what right do you have not to allow one of these companies to get into your industry, right? What are you defending, right? You don't have anything to defend. And the point I was trying to make is, as industries digitize, the incumbents don't have the capabilities to solve the problem, and the digital company simply gets in to solve the problem. And we'll talk more about that in the context of fusion. And then here, linear is no longer, 10%, 3%, 5%, but it's 2x, 3x, 5x, if not 10x, right? And we saw that in the previous chart. So the digital business transformation is really a transformation not about technology, but a digital business transformation is a transformation of the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set required to actually compete in this world, which is very different than the mindset, skill set, and the tool set that we had before. So why should we care? We have essentially three reasons why digital is becoming more and more important to every company, for every function, and increasingly at a C-level, right? It creates new competencies. It enhances what you're doing today, which is great, but it also destroys what you've been good at. And that is important because the moment we recognize that the digital destroys, then we got to figure out what's the competencies that's going to make us relevant in that future, 5, 7, whatever the time period you have. So we need to care because it's not a technology problem, right? Because what we have done over the last 20 years with technology is that the C-suite felt very comfortable creating new roles. So first we had data processing executives, then we made them IT executives. And then we're calling them digital executives. We're calling them data analysts. We're calling them chief data officers, and then we're calling them AI officers. By separating it out, we are simply reinforcing all the problems from the past. Because we are saying, oh, somebody else can solve the problem because you're now a digital expert. You solve it. I give you a little bit more money. But that doesn't simply solve because it creates, enhances, and destroys all about the competencies. So let me just spend a few minutes laying out the history lessons in 5 slides and spend the rest of the time on business strategies, end with some insights, and then I'll let Peter help moderate the discussion. History lessons in 5 very quick slides. This is how I accessed photography. This is how the current generation accesses photography. This is how I remember accessing and listening to music. This is how the current generation accesses music. This is how I remember going to a movie theater, watching a movie at a prescribed time. This is how the current generation thinks about media and entertainment. Time shifted, place shifted, and device shifted. This is how I remember accessing news. This is how the current generation accesses news. This is how I remember payments. And this is the current landscape of payments. In nearly all the cases, companies from the left side didn't make the right side. And in nearly all the cases, the analog product simply became an app inside a smartphone. We've all seen this. We've seen the first wave of transformation. In nearly all these cases, the analog product became apps inside the smartphone. But then it raises some really interesting questions. I'm not going back in history to 1900s. I'm looking at the last 15 years, most specifically the last 10 years. And that raises an interesting question. Why do these successful companies die? The successful companies die because they overinvest in what they're good at today and underinvest in what they need to be good at tomorrow. The successful companies die because they do not recognize these weak signals of disruptions and accelerating transformations. And I want to highlight the word weak signal, right? The weak signal is where some of us see, other people don't see. We try to construct what the future might be, and other people don't believe it. So they continue to operate the way we've operated, and suddenly that weak signal becomes strong, and by the time it's too late. And that's what happened there. So the area that I started focusing on is this idea. We saw that shift, but there's something else that happened during this period. When I took a photograph, nobody knew I took the photograph. Now, when you take a photograph on the phone, Apple knows, it's shared somewhere, that's stored, shared, that information is known. Same thing with music, same thing with news, same thing with payment, and I can go and talk about many, many other industries. So I started focusing on this idea called real-time data on products in use. So what happens when you observe products in use? So the first article we wrote was in the Harvard Business Review in May, June 2022. And we introduced this idea called the data graphs. The data graphs are, if I can observe all of your music habits, I can then predict what you're likely to listen next. If I can then look at what your search habits, I can predict what you're going to search next, right? Data network effects across customers, across situations. And that's what it is when you see these big companies. Facebook has today the world's best graph on 3 billion people that roughly spend about an hour, if not slightly more than 60 minutes on their platforms. Maybe a little bit more. If you average it out, it's roughly about 60 to 70 minutes, right? And if they can create Llama today, it's because that's the data that they have. That's the proprietary data that they have that allow them to understand how individuals operate on the social network, real-time information. Google with Gemini. The origin of that started with their search. 2 billion plus searches every day. You may remember a few years back, it would have to type in 4 or 5 words before they can decide what you're really searching. Then became 3, 2, and now with 1 or 2 keywords, they can predict what you're searching. That's a precursor to large language models, right? That's why they wrote the paper 12 years back, attention is all you need. That was a precursor to creating that innovation. Or Spotify with the music graph, or Netflix with the movie graph. But even today in 2023 data, 75% of what people watch is based on the first screen, right? First screen is different for you. If you're asking on a big screen like this, compared to your smartphone, because the expectation of the kind of content you will consume at that time is different. And when you search on Netflix, it'll never come back and say not available. They'll give you something close to it. If you click on it, that's valuable information. If you close out Netflix and go somewhere, that's valuable information, right? Amazon's purchase graph, and I don't have to belabor the point, but let me just take one idea of the LinkedIn, right? I presume everybody's here on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows more about you than the human resource organizations of most companies, right? But if you think about LinkedIn a few years back, people updated the data when they were looking for a job. Once they got the job, they didn't update because there's no reason to update. So LinkedIn had extremely sparse data. So they didn't have real-time data on how professionals work, right? Fast forward to 2016, Microsoft, Satya Nadella becomes the CEO, and he makes the first major acquisition of $16 billion to buy LinkedIn. And he developed this vision and tried to articulate the investor community. I'm going to convert what I have as Microsoft Graph in 2016, which was in the background, combine it with LinkedIn Graph. And he said, by 2030, I want to have 1 billion professionals on this combined graph. Facebook is 3 billion, but that is only 60 to 75 minutes. If I can combine Microsoft Graph and LinkedIn, I'm going to get data on how professionals work for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. That I'm going to get the pulse on real-time activities of how professionals do their work, which is important for me to create all of these different apps. And this is before COVID, right? But the vision was everything is going to be connected. And when everything is connected, I'm going to get a pulse on how people work. And that's 8, 10 hours a day. And so for 1 billion people, that's much more valuable data on 3 billion. And even today, if you look at the average revenue per user of Facebook, it's $55. And for the US, it's about 68. Developing countries, about $20, $25 a year. Right? It's $2. The data of us in India is $2 a month. Right? But that's enough for them to become the power. But imagine the power of this data graph that they combined with Microsoft and LinkedIn. That's 2016. So what happened in October 2024? This world knowledge from OpenAI combined with the work knowledge and the people knowledge, LinkedIn, Microsoft, OpenAI gives them the powerhouse now to start looking at Copilot at speed and scale. The underlying logic is the power of data and AI, right? So you now have this idea of graphs, and then the last 2 years with Gen AI, I simply put all of those data graphs on steroids, right? All of those data graphs on steroids. So as you look at companies, you've got fantastic brands, right? You've got fantastic brands. It's the B2B2C brands, like consumer packaged goods companies, but their data ends at a dealer or a distributor or a retailer. They don't have real-time access to the data. But with wearable technologies and sensors, QR codes, and very many other things, it's possibility to actually collect data in real time of use, right? Bluetooth allows a lot more real-time access to the data. And so this is not just about B2C, but it's really B2B2C. And every company potentially can start looking at what are the investments necessary to create that real-time access to when consumers interact with your product. So what do you uniquely know about your customers and how do you leverage it to win at the moment of truth? And for every company in the last 3, 4 years, we've been asking, what's your signature data graph, right? What can you do today? And what's your roadmap to collect real-time data? And can you become the trusted custodian of that customer data? But this is all about data graph and individuals. Which makes sense because the first wave of 5 slides that I showed you is all about individual products, individual consumption. And then many companies would tell us, oh, but we make machines. So how does it apply when I'm making a thermostat or a washer or a refrigerator, or as the case may be? This is a data graph on industries. And so that's what led to this idea of fusion frontiers and the fusion strategies. Why am I excited today? Because what we have seen so far is the 2010s transformation. The 2020s are all about industries where there is still going to be some physical component. Education is going to be physical and digital. Healthcare is going to be physical and digital. Transportation is going to be physical and digital. Hospitality is going to be physical, digital, right? You can go on and look at very many set of industries where there's going to be assets, and the assets heavy. But the bigger question is the value going to be in creating the physical product or in the data and AI that's wrapped around the physical product, right? So that's the connection between the two books. Some of you might have seen my previous book on digital matrix and the fusion strategy. And the underlying question is, how do you think about digital business transformation? So then when we were presenting this in Silicon Valley a few years back, as the precursor for fusion strategy, a typical venture capital question, how big is it and why now, right? So our estimate is that why now? Because what we have really digitized is this social graph. What we have digitized things on the web, which are all codified text with a little bit of images, a little bit of video, but we haven't digitized sounds. We haven't digitized health data as much. We haven't digitized so many other physical data that's going to make our lives very different when physical and digital start to converge. That's because the cost of computing was also very high. So we only codified what is worthwhile and easy to codify and compute. And so when you look at the next 5-10 years, the fusion frontier of the content that we can codify as the price of computing comes down, right? As NVIDIA becomes rich and richer, as the price comes down, we can start codifying a lot more. And so the fusion frontier is all about that, right? And our estimate is that it is somewhere in the order of $75 trillion worth of the global GDP. The global GDP is roughly about 105 to 110 trillion. We have digitized end to end about 25 to 30 trillion. The data is in motion, that you can take from one end to the other end. There's about $75 trillion worth of GDP where data is in silos, systems of records, systems of engagement, not in systems of intelligence that we can actually use. And so that's the frontier that we're interested in. And because we've got limited time, I thought I'll take one quick industry to motivate why this is important in the physical plus digital world. And it's an industry that I've been studying for very many years, which is the automotive industry. And we can all relate to it. The automotive industry, if you remember, when this product first came out, we called it a horseless carriage. Why? Because all we did was replace the horse. The carriage was the same, and we still refer to it as horsepower. That legacy has not changed, right? So talk about the legacy thinking and the mindset that is still permeating in the industry. So it's now an industrial product, right? Industrial combustion engines powered by gasoline. And just to give you a perspective, there are about 8+ billion people on the planet. There's roughly 2 billion motorized vehicles on the planet. 2 billion motorized vehicles on the planet, right? Two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, trucks, tractors, trailers and semis and so on, right? So that's the model that we all know. So Tesla comes in and reframes the problem as what would happen if we design cars, not as an industrial combustion engine, but cars as computers on wheels connected to the cloud, right? And that framing is important because we can look at it as a battery electric vehicle and look at it simply as a powertrain shift. or we can look at it as a digital business transformation where the product architecture has changed from being an industrial product to a digital industrial product. And when you design it as a digital industrial product, you got engineering, manufacturing, and software are all part of the same data platform. So data is in motion right through the entire value chain, continuously as the cars are being designed, built, and used on the field, right? So talk about what I said about data graphs before. We didn't know about products in use till Apple and Android came and provided smartphones that allowed us to understand real-time data in use. Cars, companies had data as designed, companies had data as manufactured, companies had data as delivered to the dealer, but the car companies did not have data and driven, right? So Tesla changed that by putting a common data and AI platform that allowed them to create this continuous loop, data, training, evaluate, and deploy. So I was one of the early Model Y users in the US with paying the premium, which I shouldn't have paid except for my research. I decided it's worthwhile to actually get the full self-driving, full supervised self-driving right from day one. And in the beginning, I would get these driving scores. I would get driving score like 90, 89, 92. I would get very upset. I'm saying, I'm a good driver, right? All of us are good drivers. I'm a good driver. Why is the score 89? I didn't make any mistake when I'm driving this bit. So I two of my students at working at Tesla at that time. So I called them and said, what's going on here? He said, this is nothing to do with my driving. It is to do with the computation of how the car would have driven at that time compared to how the human is driving. And when there is a significant variation in how the algorithm would have predicted how I should drive compared to how I drive, it takes all the data, uploads it so that the algorithm can be trained, right? So that's the fleet learning at scale, scope, and speed with AI. So now this is important because in that shadow mode, operating on vehicles from 2016, the car's autopilot, when not controlling the car, was still evaluating how the car was performing on the road, right? And then send the snapshot to the mothership, right? So this is important. If you go back 2016, it would be really be zero. So from 2021 till 2023, they have collected data on 100 million actual miles on the road. It went from 100 million to 800 million by December 2023. And now it's reached 2 billion actual miles on the road. So when we talk about exponential shift, it's linear for a very long time, very incremental, and suddenly it pivots. And so now you got data on 2 billion miles road. So the relevant indicator to track as industries become digital is not the metrics that we have used in the past, which is number of cars sold. It's the rate at which I'm collecting data, because once I collect the data, I can improve the algorithm. And so then you get to their supercomputers. Why NVIDIA is so rich is because in 2026, Tesla will have the 5th most powerful supercomputer cluster, capable of analyzing 20 million cars on the road in real time. It's unlikely that Tesla will have 20 million cars on the road, but they can then make every other car company decide whether it's worth investing in that capability on their own or partner with Tesla, right? So you begin to see the fusion of company with partners that becomes important. So this investment is happening. So it's just like AWS. For a long time, we didn't know what AWS was till it pivoted, and Tesla is in a similar position when it comes to this, right? So we can look at the automotive industry as a transformation of EV, but it's also EV plus AV plus AI, right? So if we just look at this industry as simply a lead indicator of the digital business transformation of asset-heavy sectors, and then you can say, what will tractors be in the future? What will trucks be in the future? What will trains be in the future? What will ships be in the future? And it may take a longer time, but 2007 was Apple. And now we take that for granted. It's taken, what, 15, 16 years, if not longer, for that impact. This may happen over the next 10 to 12 years. So just to bring this to a close. So in Tesla's language, in Tesla's words, they're developing the AI language of lanes. How can cars navigate on lanes without lanes being marked? But Tesla is not the only company. Waymo, which is part of Google, is developing the AI language of safe driving without driver in the cockpit, right? Because their design is not to have accelerator, steering wheel, brake, right? And to be able to do that, you should be able to develop the AI language of safe driving. This may happen only in metropolitan areas because that's where much of the congestion is. And just to give you some more numbers to think about, a typical car that is personally owned in the US is driven for 5% of the time. In 95% of the time, it is sitting idle. 75% of the miles driven in the US are driven just by the driver and nobody else in the car. And we create an automobile with 5 seats, right? We design automobile. So none of those ideas make sense today, right? Talk about sustainability and talk about what we need to do. So Waymo has got a different set of language of developing safe driving. And then if I had more time, I could have taken Uber as a detailed case. But Uber has AI language of urban movement. They're sitting on data of 65 billion rides on 10,000 cities in the world. So they know the pulse of how cities move. We can add more companies to the list. Zoox, Wave, few others. But the simple point I want to make is that this industry is just like the Apple iPhone moment. This industry is going through a transformation where the competitive advantage is not in design and marketing the way it was to something else. And that is fundamentally around data and AI. So the industrial foundations are becoming digital. The language models are becoming action models. So when we start looking at agents in the Gen AI world, that's not about Copilot. This is about actually creating an action model where the car is an agent, right? That is getting instruction either from the human driver or from the cloud, if it is Uber or Zoox or Waymo. And every industry is going to go from the analog world to chip to the cloud to the computer, right? So this is a big challenge for this company, right? Just in the last few weeks, Volkswagen is closing 3 plants in Europe, in Germany, not Europe, Germany. Yesterday, they announced a joint venture with Rivian, closing their software unit and going to rely on Rivian software unit, right? Because you can't develop the software, because the software that the car companies knew how to do was controlling the software of the cockpit, nothing else. The software is very different, right? So you begin to see the fundamental transformation that these companies all have to do. So if there is one slide from my presentation that I want you to take away, it's this slide, right? So what we see is a whole set of incumbents in every industry. If I had a whole day, I would now go through many industries. But in every industry, we take digital, data and AI, but we keep the industrial core and just add on. And it is okay as long as you don't have a competitor that starts with the digital core and uses the digital core to design the product architecture, redefines the processes away from the processes that the industrial incumbents have relied upon. Develop services that's very different than the services of the industrial age and completely redefine the business model. So the fusion strategy challenge is, are you an industrial digital company or a digital industrial company? Industrial digital companies are perfectly okay As long as everybody else is in the same position, you can be slightly faster. But the moment you have a competitor that's starting with a digital core, you're going to have a problem, right? So I can now tell you many other industries where they're just tracking and monitoring when there'll be an equivalent competitor that starts with a digital core. So the strategic challenge is, are you defending the industrial core or designing the digital core? It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but that is the existential question, and the automotive industry is exhibit A. So what happens is that if we cling to industrial core for a longer time, it simply deepens our digital debt, right? So you could be saying, nobody is coming, so let me just prolong for 2 more years. But when that new competitor comes in, they're starting with the technology of 2027, and you're trying to catch up by trying to now pay down this digital debt. That means more of your products have to be abandoned, more of your factories need to be closed, more of your service delivery needs to be re-architected, and so on. That's a fusion strategy challenge. That's the innovation challenge, right? So that's the challenge facing everybody else. So what we did was to bring the same ideas from what we learned in the analog world to then tell the industrial companies with $75 trillion worth of GDP that we have seen this story before. It's not worked. Traditional retailer just couldn't add a website to become an e-commerce leader. A traditional bank just couldn't add apps and become the mobile banking leader. Traditional TV channel couldn't add streaming to become the new media leader. Similarly, you can't just take your industrial company and just add data and AI projects and say you're going to now become fusion leaders. It's not going to happen, right? That's why I kept highlighting mindset, skill set, and the tool set. So the book essentially lays out this logic, builds off the idea of data graph, and says every analog company should then think about telematic capability to observe products in use. Once you're able to make that happen, you can interconnect with your customers and deliver greater services. So we've been working with John Deere as a tractor company. John Deere's ability to actually tell the farmer how to improve the yield on the farm rather than simply machine uptime or reliability is an example of fusion services. We've been working with Honeywell to look at creating systems across multiple elements that make construction and the factory automation work, and then ultimately create the fusion solution strategy. So that's the roadmap we lay out in the book. I'm just giving you a preview into it. But 2024, 25, we're just getting started. One industry is at leading, but if I got to connect the dots of weak signals, we've been talking about Industry 4.0 for some time. We've been talking about sensorification for some time. We've been talking about edge devices for a long time. And Ericsson has been talking about 50 billion, 60 billion connected devices for a long time. They're all becoming smart on this massive data graphs. So that's why this is the moment for every company to take this thing more seriously. So let me end with some few points just as a wrap up, then I'm happy to take questions. First one, my belief is that every analog product will become digital with hardware, software, and connectivity for collecting real-time data on products in use. Thermostat, that's why I said 1998. Refrigerator, connected to set-top box. We can begin to think about doorbells and many other things that will start to have value when it's tracked in real time. The data network effects will be the new dimension of differentiation. Learning across how customers use my product will help me understand better how to develop a recommendation for you, whether it's a thermostat or a refrigerator or a washing machine. The data network effects will become the new dimension. The winners will design and deploy generative AI capabilities to deliver economic value. We see that with Tesla, we see that with Waymo, we see that with Uber, we see that with John Deere, we see that with many others. And everyone is in different stages of using Gen AI capability, right? Some of them are using this as co-pilot. Let the customer do that. Other people are beginning to think about robotics with agent and reasoning capabilities that can adapt to conditions. So we will see the evolution of the Gen AI capabilities as we go from the Gen AI as an assistant to Gen AI as an agent, as different machines become more powerful and we can justify the investment for this economic value. The new models of partnerships, right? Whether it is within the same industry or across industries will happen. And again, the traps that companies find themselves in is that they continue to work with partners that they know. But the partners that they know reinforce the analog core. So what we need to do is think about partners in the new ecosystem to drive new profitable growth. And last but not least, is perhaps the most difficult challenge, is for every company to ask if in 2030 or 2030 plus, what proportion of its existing talent will still be relevant in that future? Don't blindly say, I want to upskill everyone, because even upskilling everyone is not going to get to what's going to happen. So from a sustainability and society point of view, what is this going to mean for people that may be structurally unemployable at that stage? So how do we begin to look at that? Rebalancing the human talent portfolio. That means we cannot separate robotics from human resources. We can't separate the design of agents from human resources. Because to me, when I use the word agent, agent is both human and machine. The future organization is humans and machines working together to co-create value. So where does the human resource organization end and the CTO and the chief operating officer organization begins? That's another reason for fusion across functions. So what's the big leadership challenge? If there's one more slide I want to get you to remember out of the talk, which is how is this fusion going to get played out? If we look at technology's impact today, it's relatively easy to understand because we know what the technology is. We know what the use cases are. I don't like the term use cases, but live with that for the time being. I know how to make the business case. I know how to manage Horizon 1 with technology today. Then many companies have this wonderful opportunity to create greenfield labs, right? Proof of concept, show what AI can do, right? Do all of those things. And when the previous book I wrote, Digital Transformation, that's where I got the idea of dreamers. These are dreamers that dream completely unconstrained. These are the doers. The biggest challenge is to find people that will manage Horizon 2, right? Because Horizon 2 are the designers and the doubters. Why? Because they've got to design by taking the best of this into Horizon 2, but they also have to stop doing what you're good at today because it's not going to be relevant in Horizon 3. They've got to learn from the dreamers and bring those ideas faster than competitors. So Horizon 2 is balancing act of bringing the future back in, folding the future that you've seen early enough so that you can learn, just like we saw the Tesla, the inflection point. At the same time, have the courage and the conviction to abandon what you've been good at because it's no longer going to be relevant in the future. So connecting back to this idea of the 4Ds, every organization needs the dreamers who dream the art of possible without being constrained by today. But the dreamers need to be supported by designers of focused experiments to understand what is feasible, technologically and economically viable. The designers then provide convincing data to convince the doubters who are healthy skeptics, not just blind cynics, but healthy skeptics, that will then galvanize the organization to abandon things that they've been good at, because that's no longer going to be relevant in the future. And I need the doers to be able to execute this at scale, right? So that's the idea of why the multi-horizon issue from a leadership perspective is a leader that's very good in Horizon 1 is unlikely to be the leader that you want running Horizon 2, because they are wedded to what they are good at. What you need is leaders that are prepared to see the future and make the adaptation happen. Those are the challenges that I see in Volkswagen, GM, Ford, and Mercedes and others. So my last slide is the analog to digital shift. We saw that movie is finished. The incumbents failed to counter digital threats in the asset-light sectors. Will this time be different? So we wrote this book as the next practice book, not the best practice book, to lay out what we believe is going to happen, realizing that cannot be perfect, but we just want to give a roadmap for people to begin to think about the fact that this is going to happen faster than most people expect. And if the last 2 years of Gen AI is any indication, believe it or not, we haven't quite reached the second birthday for ChatGPT. That's next week, right? That's just 2 years. And you can see the impact it's already had. And then if you just project into the next 2 years, it's going to be that 10x order of magnitude change. So hopefully we can begin to see the impact of industrial Gen AI, industrial AI, just like we have seen with the consumer AI. Thank you very much, and I'm now happy to take any questions. If you give them more drinks, the questions will be actually more.
Yeah, more bold questions. Well, I don't doubt. Thank you, Professor Venkat. It's I think this was one of the best 1 hour investments I've made for the last 10 years, easily. You put words and you framed what's going on in such an excellent way. I don't know about you guys, many of you are from Ericsson, but also other companies, and at least we have been talking about digital transformation for the last 15 years, and I'm still amazed when I come to companies and hear we're looking into digital transformation, and the scope around digital transformation just gets sort of like pushed further and further ahead. And there's also your last conclusion here. Yes, this is maybe the last train leaving the station for the incumbents. If they don't get this right, then it will be the new players. So thank you again for providing us with this outlook on the future. I have one question before you start taking the questions. In factories today, so like really modern, hyper-modern automated factories, we talk about black factories. The lights are out, but a lot of stuff is happening by themselves. Do you foresee, through the help of AI agents, that will have black companies, more or less with no employees?
Yeah, we may not have black company with one owner that's the super oligarch that just got investment and everything being done. But I strongly believe that the number of people required to create unit of value will be significantly lower, right? Do we need as many people in the banking industry as we see today? The answer is no. Do we need as many people developing pharmaceutical drugs as we have today in the R&D labs? No. Because just look at this year's Nobel Prize.
Yeah,
The two Nobel Prizes were given to an AI researcher, right? That's an example of fusion, right? It's basically when Demis turns around and gets a Nobel Prize and he's able to do AlphaFold 3 chemistry, and isomorphic labs is creating proteins, and you got the biotech companies competing against the tech bio companies. The biotechs take the biology as given and adds technology around it. There's a lot of people. The tech biotech's technology is the starting point and then figures out who the people we need to have. So it's not going to be a black organization, but the number of people required is going to be significantly lower.
Do we have a question from the audience?
We have Cassie.
More than one question is to give you a little bit of a hint of what must happen online during your presentation. So we've had a very healthy discussion about various topics that you were asking. If you want me to summarize it a little bit, we talked about the importance of weak signals that you mentioned. We talked about regulation. We talked about cost structures and how this affects this one. So perhaps I can start with one question from the big team here, which has been, or our understanding in the discussion, is this a weak signal or is already a big signal that you better follow, following the question? Is this the last train leaving the station?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I say the weak signal, I want us to look beyond what is widely published, what is widely known, right? Every individual can ask, what is it that I'm seeing that others are not seeing? And if that signal becomes strong, what is the impact on my company or my function or me, right? So if you're pre-chat GPT, we all said educated professional workforce is protected because technology is going to automate the factory, right? We are protected because they need us. We used to say things that computers can do, humans cannot, and what humans can do, the computers cannot, right? Because computers can only do predictable models. ChatGPT significantly changed it, right? Now we're beginning to ask more difficult set of questions. So when I now make the analogy between a co-pilot, which is a very friendly way of looking at ChatGPT, which is augmenting what I'm doing, helping me do my job better, but my job is not threatened, to this being an agent where my job is threatened, then everyone has got to ask, when is that agent ready for prime time? Is that agent someone under my control, or is that agent someone outside of my control, right? And for me, the weak signal that I'm tracking, and each one of you may be tracking other things. I'll give you a simple example that I've learned by looking at games, right? Looking at games. You remember 1996, Gary Kasparov played against IBM Deep Blue and won. IBM asked Gary Kasparov to play next year. So 1997, he played and he lost. In that 1 year, the computer's learning is much faster than human learning at that time. Even at the peak, we're not talking about the average chess player, the best chess player in the world, right? 1997. Fast forward to 2011, there was a game called Jeopardy. Jeopardy is a precursor to natural language processing, right? If you remember that game, it's a quiz show with a difference. Answers are flashed, and you got to frame the question, which is very difficult, right? Suddenly, just a number or a word, you got to come up with the question in a category, and they got to do it faster than the two best humans, because if you're slow and the two best humans start pressing the buzzer, they keep coming up with a question, you lose. And if you're fast and you press the buzzer and you haven't framed the question, then you lose points. So it's actually a very interesting game to look at machine processing and human processing. And 2011, the machine beat the humans, right? The best two humans, not average human. That's a precursor to large language models. So to me, that's a weak signal at that time, right? That natural language processing is happening, just a matter of computing power. Then let's fast forward to 2016, which is Go, when Google's DeepMind created AlphaGo, and it defeated the best champion, Lee Sedol. And if you haven't watched the movie, That's a movie very well. I recommend 75 minutes on Netflix, watching the AlphaGo movie, because Lee Sedol went in thinking there's no way in which the machine is going to beat me, right? But he won one game. He lost 4 games. But what is interesting is that it played moves that humans have not played before. So that's now the precursor as a weak signal to say that there is some aspect of creativity, and broadly defined, that the machines are thinking out of the box, right? Rather than being only told what to play. But what happened after that was they created Alpha Zero. And that to me is the weak signal, right? Alpha Zero was, so far, all these were trained with human data and told the machine to remember that and play. With faster computer, it can look at the entire options and play. Alpha Zero was, they gave what is the game called Go, what the rules are, and what does winning mean, told the machine to learn how to play. And in 40 days, it learned to play against the AlphaGo that was trained with human data, and they defeated 100 games to 0. Right, this complex game. So we now have the capability for machines to learn if we give them boundary conditions and rules. These are weak signals. So when we now think about cars navigating or tractors navigating, once we have enough computing power and the data network effects, we can now make these agents have reasoning capabilities more than the language capability. So to me, these are weak signals, right? All of you may be looking at other weak signals, right? In your own domain. Just project what will have to be true for that to become really a strong signal. That's the discipline we need to have in leadership.
Any questions from the physical audience, or?
I'll ask Kat if there are any more, otherwise I think it's time.
But I was responding to his
We
question.
do have.
Weak
We
signal.
do have many, so if you don't have there, we can ask from here.
Maybe we can just go.
Yeah, one.
You know, one-on-one. So yes, one question. Here.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Do I need to?
I can repeat it otherwise.
Okay. I mean, it was basically a follow-up on this idea. I mean, there's a lot of talk about general purpose AI and, you know, whether we will hit there. And what you are talking about is, you know, not necessarily general purpose, but some type of at least multi-purpose AI.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what you were talking about with, you know, having to have access to all this data, you know, how far do you think we are away from a general purpose AI that would sort of take over from that? And, you know, what will be the scenario there? Because then, you know, it's maybe not, is it then one player or 2 players that takes over everything? You know, what's the...
Yeah, we don't need to repeat it since sound is good. Or
It sounds good.
It's a great question, right? I purposely stayed away from that theme because AGI and ASI, right? Artificial general intelligence and then artificial super intelligence is really the province of computer scientists and modelers, right? And there's differing predictions of when we will get to AGI, when we'll get to ASI, whether the current transformer models will get us there, or will we have new models? So there's a lot of that. But let's just take a slight variation to that, which is for any given industry, we don't need to get AGI. For any given industry, it's back to your question about the black company. For any given industry, the industry data that you want to codify and create intelligence for getting better farming, better pharma, better transportation, better healthcare, whatever else, you don't need AGI. You just need to make the current system very different and unleash the potential of what is possible. That is, to me, easily achievable in the next 5 years, irrespective of whether we get to AGI or ASI. Now, from a societal perspective, AGI and ASI are extremely important questions, right? Because then who controls it? Is it one or two? It's the Elon Musk plus somebody controlling the world. That's a more difficult question to answer. But But I'm really focusing on the industrial space and saying, can we have a good set of ideas on industrial AI models that will solve personalized education at scale, personalized medicine at scale, personalized farming, and I think we'll get there.
Kazi? Oh,
Okay, we just Kazi, yeah.
Questions from here. We have well, a lot of people saying thank you very much from here, definitely. And I will together two questions from yeah. First, well, these two are in this new world. How do or where do sustainable competitive advantage resides, and because of that, how do business models evolve?
Yeah, I think let's not spend too much time on sustainable competitive advantage, right? Because when we are in a period of inflection, we don't even know what the new set of competitive advantages are going to be. And then we got to figure out whether that is enduring for a long time. But if I've got to put elements of competitive advantage in the future, the elements of competitive advantage is really shifting from economies of scale in production, which is reducing the unit cost of a product, to economies of expertise, where the organization's expertise get codified into these machines, right? That's why number of people required to solve a problem gets reduced. And the moment you have an expertise model that is in a codified algorithm, we can scale up much faster than anybody else, right? So I'm looking at situations where companies are increasingly codifying and really focusing on economies of expertise. Because if economies of expertise building upon data network effects and AI is the beginning of a competitive advantage. Whether that's going to be sustainable for a long time, I don't want to bet on it. So I would rather think about it. And then the second part about business models, I think the business model shifts from selling products and delivering services to actually solving problems. Because customers have problems, individuals have problems. Today, products and services address a piece of the problem, not fully, because the way my problems of transportation can be solved is different than your problems of transportation. Today, we get transportation as a product or a service, not necessarily as a solution. But over time, we can get more personalization, and can we deliver personalization at scale, at speed, at an affordable price point? That's the business model that's going to be profitable going forward.
From the audience here.
If we talk a lot about AI taking our jobs, making companies smaller, more efficient, do you foresee big employment, or will all these people that lose their jobs find other jobs?
Well, here again, there are multiple viewpoints on when that will happen and at what kind of jobs will get eliminated and so on. There are techno-optimists that believe that we'll create new jobs. Then there are techno-pessimists that says we'll never be able to create as many jobs as we lose. And I'm somewhere in between that basically says there is going to be a set of interesting options where there'll be new adaptation of your skill for which you may not get paid as much as what you got paid, but it doesn't have to go to universal basic income at the lowest level, right? Somewhere in between. How will different societies adapt to that is an entirely open question, right? But in the short term, there will be structural underemployment for sure.
Do you foresee unrest because of this?
So this is what I'm saying. So then it depends on which society and what society does to solve that problem is an open question. And I don't want to touch upon my recent election as one example of that, right? But this is where, as a society, we got to deal with this, right? If agents take over, the idea of the black factory, right? Factories used to work 8-hour shift. Then we made humans work 16-hour shifts. Then we made humans work 24-hour shifts. We're reducing it a little bit. Agents will work 24 hours. By definition, when agents work 24 hours and robots working 24, we haven't even touched the idea of robots by 2030, right? Which are getting really powerful, at a price point of $30,000-$40,000. If I can get a robot at $40,000 with only electricity cost associated with running it, with a little bit of software update, that is actually significantly lower than human cost for certain type of jobs. So those jobs are going to be gone anyway, right? Can we repurpose them? Is there new opportunities? This is left to society to figure out what else can we get them to do. And so I don't have an easy answer to that. But we have to recognize that this is going to happen, right? This is going to happen.
Yeah, I have more questions on that, but I guess I should get let others.
Yes, but we have Cassie again, or?
We have questions.
Yes, we still have questions here. There was one before that related or was talking about, there was a sort of a discussion about regulatory landscape and things like that, especially in the heavy assets, because it's wider or bigger than in the light assets industry. How should regulatory, how can we make or help regulatory evolve towards a good direction? And is regulatory a problem or a solution?
Yeah, I mean, the regulation has always been a two-edged sword, right? Purely from a consumer perspective, we want regulation to make sure that there's no consumer harm, and we want to prevent monopolies from controlling. But we have also seen that in the last 15 years, when it comes to data and privacy, the regulation has not really worked, right? You know much more about GDPR than I know, but what research I've studied basically says GDPR is one more nuisance before you got to click on the website or whatever else, right? So, and we also had the shift in business models where what is privacy when I'm giving it to you free? Right? That's why I gave the Facebook example of $60 is the average that they're advertising using my data, but they're giving it to me free. So they made it very clear that they're going to take my data and advertise it because that's the business model. I didn't fully understand what they would do. And for 20 years later, I'm trying to get them to change. Obviously, that's not going to work. But in the business to business context, the data protection is much more rigid than in the B2C world. And that's why I like that space to do some research, because this is about companies earning the right to observe their product in use in the customer location. Because if I cannot observe that, I can't improve on it. So it's part of the contractual obligation to observe. And once contractually the customer allows me to observe, you can then say, should I give it to them at a lower price because they're observing? Or can I give them better value because I'm observing? Those are business to business contracts where the regulators are less involved, and the business to business contracts get written out as performance contract rather than a standard contract. But there are other set of regulations that start to come in, which is environmental cost. I haven't touched on the idea of what is the energy it's going to take for this data and AI at scale in the next 5 years. Why are these digital companies investing in nuclear power plants, right? Microsoft restarting 3 Mile Island in the US, or Google investing in micro nuclear reactors, small nuclear reactors, and what's going to happen with fossil fuel, solar power, and all that. Or can we stop progress on large language models and start focusing on small language models that will run on mobile devices and wearable devices, where we don't need constant access back to big models for inferences, but we can have smaller models that will give nearly as good, but not necessarily perfect, but that is good enough for our purpose. Can we create those set of trade-offs? And these are all trade-offs that companies are going to make, consumers have to make, and society has to make, right? But you've got to think through that logic of what is societal cost from an energy perspective to make this happen. Those create new jobs as well, right?
Thanks. I saw some hands here before, but I think you were the first one.
Yes, I had one hand to continue the talks for the question, what should society do? Because I mean, the message you bring forward is very much a industry leader audience type of message, right? And you sort of shrug away from, I don't know what the society should do. But I think it's up to us because we
Yeah.
are the society, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the main question.
Yeah.
And given your insights, what are some actions the society could do to not stop this, but to make it evolve in a way that is not painful for us, the society? Do you have any?
Yeah, but again, we have to look at different dimensions of societal impact. Underemployment, unemployment, mass unemployment is one clear dimension, right? The second is really about educating the next generation to actually ride this wave. Our current education system is largely focused on finding answers rather than framing questions. So what does it mean to reimagine education to be structurally fit for what is emerging in this particular case? Then you got things like second order effects of different industries. So 2 billion motorized vehicles is unacceptable. Cars that are working for 5% of the time is unacceptable. What if we have transportation as a service where we are pretty much able to access any piece of transport that we want when we want to go at the equivalent price of owning a car and paying for insurance and paying for parking and paying for all that? Those are all societal rebalancing of multiple priorities. Those are areas that we can actually, as cities and as countries and as people, we can start to address those questions that are easier to manage rather than at a very high level, right? That's where I'm focused more on my time on that.
Yes, and I mean, the industrial era that we're leaving had the side effect to sort of concentrate to some extent.
Yes.
The big industry, the global industries that you didn't have 100 years ago, basically. And the feeling with the digital industry is that will be even more sort of aggregated of. And is that good for society, or should the society balance that with some of the current methods or not yet invented methods?
I don't know what the new methods are that we can use. I really don't know what are the mechanisms we can use to slow it down.
And I listened to one of the AI pioneers, can't remember who very clearly said, tax is industry now, right? It will both sort of keep it slowed down so we can think, but also those taxes could be used for the unemployment it will create.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been the big whip of taxes, right? I mean, Bill Gates said 5 years back, if companies start employing robots, we should tax them. Right? Robots should pay tax, just like humans pay tax. Now, he meant it half seriously and half facetiously. Those are all mechanisms that different regimes are going to use. But there is this phase of innovation in AI, which is where we are right now, where massive investments are going to create innovation in these models. I don't think we can stop that, right? I don't think we should stop that. But how we actually make use of that innovation is where we get to this idea of what's the appropriate returns and who gets to appropriate returns. The concentration of wealth in the industrial age, if I go back, if my memory serves me right now, the concentration of wealth when you had the JP Morgans, the Vanderbilts, and the robber barons in the early 1900s was significantly greater than the concentration of wealth today with the digital companies, right? At one point in time in 1929, JP Morgan was prepared to loan money to bail out the US government. I don't think there's anyone here who's got $30 trillion to bail out the US government today, right? So in that sense, the order of magnitude has changed. But you and I look at the absolute value and say, this is crazy to have someone having $200 billion. But the relative thing is different. But there are many studies that begin to show that post-industrial, the end of the industrial age has actually lifted the poverty on many economies of the world because we gave them tools and we created trade regimes from which we bought the products. Now, will we create similar thing with digital goods? Will we create similar thing? Those are all open questions. I don't want to ever speculate on how these new the geopolitics in the next 10 years is going to get played out on this. These are complex issues.
Thanks. Kasi, you got the.
We do.
On-
We do
on
have a
time.
question here.
Yeah, Kasi, I just want to say this. I'm putting you now in responsible to actually select the last question from the online audience.
Yeah, I have one.
Great.
And it's one of the topics that we talk in this for this community, which we started talking about the meta crisis and things that are happening and how we can try to help, not necessarily solve, but at least help. So your book and the thesis is a lot how to help industries and companies, give them like a good practice to try based on your experience. But how can we apply these fusion strategies in public sector, communities, or others to try to address as well challenges that we are facing today in this meta crisis?
Yeah. But I think the one area that I would highlight is education, right? Because we don't see in the industrial age, we mechanized, but people could still do things with their body, right? They could still do physical labor and create some wealth for them, because that was not completely gone, right? In this new world, we need to give them the equivalent tools and skills to apply their mind to create value. And that means the education has to be much more thought through than how we have thought through education in the past. And let me just elaborate on one more point. And again, I come at it from the US perspective. The US universities have been designed to educate a few at the expense of many. They are all focused on selectivity. So I'll select 10% of the applicants. I'll select 8% of the applicants. The leaderboard is based on how selective the universities are. Maybe that's the wrong metric. We got to educate as many people as possible, because technology allows the possibility of giving this capability to educate as many as possible and let people then figure out their own level of achievement instead of creating this class of educated and less educated class, right? And that something as a societal level, we can begin to address that. Not just saying free education or things like that that we have done in the past, but really giving them as good an education as possible, giving them access to them as possible. And I'll give you the reason why I'm saying that's an important part is there's a company, there's an entity called Udacity, and Udacity in the US is one of the first online micro credential course. Sebastian Thurn, who taught computer science at Stanford, started Udacity. And I remember walking into Udacity and there's this big set of numbers on the board. The first number is how many students have taken the class. The second one is some other number, and the third one is 142, and then some other numbers, and the 142 number sticks in my mind. So I asked, what is that 142 number? 142 number is the best Stanford student that has taken the class. The score that person got is 142, 142nd in the rank, which means there were 141 others that did better than the best Stanford student on that course, except that they couldn't get into Stanford, or they were not willing to go to Stanford, or they couldn't afford to apply to Stanford, but they could ace that exam, right? I'm using computer science basic as one example of that. So his idea is that we got to democratize it, right? We got to make people access to it. What they do with it is different. But if you cut people off from access to that possibility, then we're going to just accelerate this divide, right? So at a societal level, we got to do that. And then we got to look at the demographic dividends, right? The demographic dividend of places like India, which is, I think the last count, I think I left India 40 plus years back. There's something like 700 million Indians that are born after I left India, right? That's a very different demography than when I left. So what does it mean to educate so many people, right? Whether it's India or Africa or other parts of the world, that we have defined around this north, south, and west compared to maybe a new nomenclature. And what if you train them, and what role can they play? Other than how we did it in the industrial age, which is outsourcing and offshoring, and low value added, and create cost arbitrage and make money on the labor arbitrage between the different countries. Maybe there's other issues that we need to address as this community start looking at this meta crisis.
Thanks. Last question from the audience here, and then of course you will stay here for a while, or
I'm
You're not-
staying with Geraldo.
you're not going anywhere.
I mean,
So
I'm
you
not
will
going-
be able to ask the questions in person also, but who is most, you have already asked one. Do we have any more? We have the man in the black cap.
Me? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't see that.
Vedant, it's your hat.
Thank you so much, Venkat. I'm going to bring it back from all of the concerns about AI to something a bit more practical. I'm thinking about your Horizon 2. And you mentioned you work with John Deere and Honeywell. And they've been in IoT space since way back in time when you
Yeah.
met.
Yeah.
My question to you is, what did you observe with them with regards to what you're teaching us here? And you're seeing that they're actually unlocking, and I'm assuming they're moving into this Horizon 2
Yeah,
space.
it is. It's not easy, right? It's not easy. So John Deere has been on this journey for about 25 years, right? They started automation. They were one of the early ones to put sensors. They now have tractors that have a direct satellite connection with Starlink, right? They're beginning to shift the metrics from number of tractors sold to the number of engaged acres on the farm. These are major shift on the part of the company. But they got this major economic cycles of capital equipment and the industrial revolution. But John May, under the current CEO, they've decided that just selling tractors is not the way forward. They got to look at tractor as a means towards improving the farm productivity, right? They got operation center that's beginning to collect data, even if it is not John Deere products, right? To understand the yield on the farm, which is a big challenge, as we all know, by going to the farm and getting a competitor's data to come in, which means you really become the trusted custodian of the data. And that's a long journey that they're going through, right? And I picked that as an example to get us thinking that once there is a CEO commitment to be able to do that, then you're well on the way, right? Because there is a commitment. And the same thing with Honeywell, right? Adam Derinsky is a computer scientist by training. So when you got a CEO that is a computer scientist who's just retired and is given to Vimal Kapoor. So Adam's belief has always been that they got roughly 1 million buildings on which Honeywell systems operate. For many years, they thought these were all individual buildings in individual regions sold by the local company under a separate balance sheet, right? They were never seen as one. His view was, no, I want to look at these million as million connected assets. And once I collect data on these million connected assets in the building, I'll know about sustainability, I'll know about the LEED certification in a much better detail than. So he's beginning to think about all these as connected assets. And that is the breakthrough he created. And then he got the team together and said, what will it take for us to go from being an independent portfolio of businesses to actually a business that's much more integrated? What AI models can we share across? And they said, we all deal with preventive maintenance. We want to be able to go to proactive maintenance. So we run AI models in the different thing, abstract and share across. So the role of the corporate center was not allocating financial capital, but really allocating digital capital or knowledge capital, right? So that's the shift that we see in Honeywell, is a recognition that GE didn't have. When they created industrial internet, they put that as a profit center separate. The rest of the organization didn't care, right? Whereas here, the idea is that I want to share from AI models. I want to share from the models and figure out how to learn as a corporation. And so those are a few things that we are beginning to see. So these are all organizing logic that industrial companies need to recognize to go away from what has made them successful to what is necessary to make them successful in the future.
Thank you. And also thank you for everyone that came here today. Thank you to everyone that came in online. This series of events that we are hosting here, the content, if we call it that, it blows me away. We had several successful presentations before. You are now number one. Let's see if someone can remove you from that place. But thank you again, Professor Venkat. It was a privilege, real privilege actually, to listen to you and getting the kind of like the bleeding edge information. And if there's one way, I mean, we were talking about what can we do, you know, thinking about society and so forth. We can at least view this as a map showing us where the future is heading from the commercial industrial perspective, and then use that as our signal into what we need to do, what will the implications be for society. So thank you again. Thanks.
I will keep the session on. It's just that we stop the recording, correct? So the formal session ends, but there are people that might want to listen in and comment on things that's being said.
Yeah.
But I think that's at least my suggestion.
Do you have some article or link to the Honeywell case? Or?
There are 2 articles on the Honeywell case.
Yeah.
I can send it out.
Right, because it's really interesting to hear.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the